Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, a cartel war in northern Mexico.
It's the worst violence in 15 years in a city known as the cartel's epicenter.
The arrest of a top drug lord has resulted in bodies dumped on the street and hundreds dead. With a new president in charge, what can be done to save lives? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
I'm John Holman. I'm the correspondent for Al Jazeera English, and I'm based in Mexico.
Well, John, welcome back. I've talked to you many times over the years for this podcast, and you often report on people in pretty precarious situations and dangerous conditions. And this story out of Northwest Mexico is no different, except it also adds betrayal, questions of loyalty, and bodies on the street.
The attacks between the two fighting factions are taking place mostly at night, and so every morning right now, the city is waking up to scenes like this one, bodies dumped in the street.
So take us to Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa state. What is it like usually, and what does it look and feel like now?
It's the epicenter, really, of what's often referred to as the Sinaloa cartel. This is really a collection of different organized crime outfits, usually family orientated, that together form a sort of loose coalition, a federation. And Culiacan, the city itself, it's the capital of the state, but it's also the capital of the Sinaloa cartel. It's a place that I've been to quite a lot of times, and I usually look forward to the trip. It's got great seafood, tacos of prawns, of octopus, good ceviche, lots of cold beer, a real sort of party town in its way, with a lot going on there, some of it legal and some of it not. This time round was very different. Shops and restaurants closing early, not a lot of people out in the streets, especially not after dark. A real difference to the Culiacan that I've been used to from the past.
Nothing encapsulates that difference, perhaps for me, in hearing about your reporting trip there than the fact that you and your team witnessed a shootout in a shopping center.
Yeah, that was mid-afternoon, actually. There was so many police and soldiers. There's a civil war really going on in the Sinaloa cartel right now, which is the reason that we made this trip up there. And one of the manifestations of that have been shootouts. Soldiers in full sort of battle gear heading through the shopping center with people in a coffee shop getting really nervous, trying to go after some gang leaders that they'd obviously cornered. So at the moment, there's not just these rival factions from the Sinaloa cartel going to war. There's also more than 3,000 federal forces, most of them armored up to the neck, trying to sort of stop things going into complete chaos there. But what we saw even more when we were there was that after dark, the factions were basically picking people up, and they seemed to be low-level operatives, the sort of low-hanging fruit, taking them, torturing them, killing them, and then dumping their bodies. Some people are turning up dead. Some people are still disappeared. The numbers are that there are more than 200 dead after 6 weeks of this in Culiacan. But that number of the disappeared, according to civil society groups, is actually even higher. So if some people are not turning up, that's not uncommon, actually, with organized crime in Mexico. But again, when you think of the relatives of these people, whether they were involved or not, the state of limbo that they're in and that they might be in for some years to come, not knowing what's happened to their relative, it's another type of trauma that's going to be generated from this.
You mentioned the civil war of sorts between these factions of cartels. Let's talk about what preceded that shootout. So I know many of us have heard the name El Chapo, who was for many years the head of the Sinaloa drug cartel, centered there. He is in a supermax prison now in the U.S., but there's another faction in town run by someone named El Mayo, another Sinaloa kingpin leader who was recently arrested himself. His name may not be as familiar. What led to that arrest and how did it happen?
Yeah, you're right. His name, I think, isn't as familiar to people outside of Mexico. But inside of Mexico, El Mayo Ismael Zambada has always been seen as someone with if not as much power, possibly more power, possibly only a little bit less power as El Chapo himself.
Zambada is the last major drug lord of his generation, having avoided capture for over 4 decades, despite leading one of the world's most important drug empires.
And they're all sometimes working together and sometimes competing. And El Mayo as well had been around for decades. So it was such a shock when he finally got arrested. I think anyone that's been following this saw him as possibly the only one that might live out his old age in the mountains of Sinaloa, where he had several different hideouts. So this all happened on the 25th of July.
This was the moment 2 of the world's most wanted drug lords were detained on U.S. soil. Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the 76-year-old co-founder and leader of the Sinaloa cartel, and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, son of convicted drug lord El Chapo Guzman, are now in U.S. custody.
And it's quite a story, actually. And El Mayo told it afterwards himself through a letter that was released through his lawyer. And what he says happens is this. He thought he was going to a meeting to solve a local political dispute, and he was going to go there with Joaquin Guzman Lopez, who'd invited him. Now, Joaquin Guzman Lopez is actually the son of El Chapo. And the sons of El Chapo are called Los Chapitos. And Los Chapitos sort of took on the reign of their father and started controlling that faction of the cartel and a lot of things that were going through it. El Mayo also has a son. We're talking about crime families here, if you want to look at it like that. And El Mayo had another faction of the cartel. They're often rivals, but he thought that because he'd known, as he says, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, since he was a young boy, he trusted him and he was safe to go to this meeting. He was at some point shown into a darkened room. He was then roughed up. After that, he was put in a truck and he was taken about 25 minutes on a road to a remote airstrip. We went down that road, following the path. At the moment, it's buzzing with cartel lookouts that are called punteros, just like the rest of the city. You get off-road, you have to ask a few questions, and you get to this remote airstrip that's in the middle of these cornfields. Once he got there, he said that he was restrained by Joaquin Guzman Lopez with zip ties, himself restrained to his seat, and then he was flown 2.5 hours to El Paso, where US federal agents were waiting and took them both into custody.
Both men are facing multiple charges in the United States for leading the cartel's criminal operations, including its deadly drug manufacturing and trafficking networks.
So if you had to summarize, I suppose, all of this story in one word for El Mayo and his lawyer, he doesn't say it in the letter, but it's been resounding across Culiacan, Sinaloa, that word would be betrayal.
Oh, wow. Okay. The twists and turns of that story, it really does sound like something out of a movie, perhaps a movie we will see soon because it's still ongoing right now. So they're both taken into custody. What could that mean? Or at least what does El Mayo allege that means? So
in his letter, he's quite careful not to sort of take it on and allege everything after that. But obviously the questions that have been asked a lot by reporters are, did Joaquin Guzman Lopez bring El Mayo with him as a sort of present to US federal authorities to try and get a better deal for himself in handing himself in? And perhaps not just for himself, but also his brother, Ovidio Guzman, who was also in US custody and had been for some time before that. So that's the question. Now, the lawyer for Joaquin Guzman Lopez denies any such deal, but that's obviously the assumption, perhaps the questions that a lot of people are asking about why exactly he would do this.
Adding to the intrigue here is a question I have on who was involved and what story or narrative can be believed, because it sounds like that means the U.S. government is involved, which then inevitably has to mean the Mexican government is also involved. And all of those forces had to come together for this arrest.
Yeah, so the Mexican government is saying that they were really in the dark about what was happening when El Mayo was taken to El Paso.
We're investigating if this was an arrest or if these men handed themselves over. This is part of the information we are waiting to get from the US government. The Mexican government did not take part in this detention or handover.
And I think the only real concrete account we've got of what has happened is El Mayo's letter. He's got his narrative out there that has been questioned by journalists in Culiacan that I was talking to. And really the question is this: could someone who was so canny, who had such good security, who'd survived to the age of 76, where most drug traffickers, leaders or otherwise, live fast, live young, and then are either captured or died, could have been captured so easily?
After the break, what would it take to bring the violence to an end? So, John, the fallout from that really dramatic arrest that you described blew up in September, bringing us to what we are seeing on the streets of Culiacan today. What happened?
So things were sort of quiet, actually, in Sinaloa after that arrest. The letter from El Mayo through his lawyer came out on August the 10th. I think all of us watching, journalists here, were expecting things to blow up. Of course, with those sorts of things that he was saying, with that word betrayal hanging in the air, you'd think everything was going to kick off, but it didn't. And the explanation for that afterwards, it's been reported, and a couple of people that we talked to as well said the same, that may have been because El Mayo's son, also called Ismael Zambada, Siqueiros, his second name is different, was gathering forces. So if you're going to take on Los Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo, who have been building up this force reportedly, you're also going to need a force of your own. And reportedly, he was trying El Mayo's son to gather together alliances with different factions within this loose group, the Sinaloa cartel, to be able to take them on. Then on September the 9th, it all kicks off. There's a shootout. We hear radio chatter that was posted online and went a bit viral. Allegedly, a commander for El Mayo saying, basically, let's go to get Los Chapitos, let's send them to hell.
Wow.
And that's when you start to see popping up on social media, very heavily tooled up, basically soldiers for the cartel on buses, getting on board and telling them, turn back now, you don't want to go ahead. It's an absolute chaos. And you see videos of cartel soldiers in trucks with, heavy mounted guns on the back of the truck, sort of guerrilla-style warfare, and at some points open shootouts.
Yeah. So, John, let's talk about the state, because you said that there is now the presence of army or military, more official federal forces. All of this was happening shortly before newly elected President Claudia Sheinbaum was inaugurated. This is still just her first month in office. So what can she do?
It's a really difficult question that I think she's pondering right now. It's obviously a priority for her because she had, she does a morning press briefing every morning. And in one of them, she said she was going to announce her security plan for her administration. And in that same press conference, she talked about Sinaloa. So she's obviously thinking very much about what can she do to calm the situation.
We just have to remember the issue of Sinaloa. How is it that Sinaloa has this increase in homicides?
It sprung up not on her watch, on the watch of the last president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and the sense was that he was outgoing, that this wasn't something that he wanted to get really involved in. So it is down to her. And it's, I guess, the first big open test of a really difficult situation. She sent her security minister up there to sort of show solidarity and do a bit of a walk around. We keep seeing more federal forces being sent up there and deployed, whether that's army, whether that's the National Guards. They're throwing a lot at this at the moment. I spoke to a friend of mine just the other day, a journalist, who was saying that there does seem a slight shift from when we were there a couple of weeks ago. When we were there, basically, the army, the federal forces were just going in these huge convoys through the town, which showed their presence, but it's been a criticism really throughout the violence that Mexico's encountered over the last decade that doesn't really go after where people are in their safe houses, where the population are. So maybe there's a sense there that more needs to be done than just roaring through the street in convoys. A friend of mine from Culiacan, who's quite well connected in that world, was saying to me, because this is about family, because this, according to El Mayo and his letter, is about betrayal, these two groups are not going to stop fighting until one of them has decisively won. How do you deal with that when there's no negotiation? How as the state do you get in the middle of them and force them to stop because they're so embedded there? Eradicating them doesn't seem at the moment to be an option.
Well, I imagine people are looking at her track record as the mayor of Mexico City, in which she brought homicides down, and hoping that she can do the same here. Is that too much to ask?
I think that it's early days yet. And I think it's going to be difficult because in the past, when we've seen these sorts of situations resolve themselves, it's not because federal forces have thrown a lot at it. It's generally been because something's happened between the two groups. Either one has won or lost, or there's been some sort of negotiation. There was a lot of noise from the US. There was a statement from the Attorney General about how they managed to take El Mayo into custody and one of El Chapo's sons, and about how they were really attacking the fentanyl business. And it's something that we've seen over and over again in Mexico. In the past, there's been a kingpin strategy. You take out the leaders, this thing's going to crumble. And every time, all that it's led to is a battle for succession and more bloodshed for the population. Wow. So I wonder if Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican government, is looking at the US a bit and thinking, well, you've got your prize arrest, but look at the mess that it's left here.
And all of that calculus by those major players, the US, Mexico, those in the cartel, they don't often take into account the people. So one of the things I appreciate about your reporting, John, is that you do, and that you often take us to the heart of those who are actually affected. What has this meant for the residents of Culiacan?
Yeah, the impact has been huge. I think when we say the economic impact, sometimes we think of these big macro figures and graphs, but we went to ordinary business people, no restaurants. They're all closing early at the moment. It was 6 p.m. Before dark, we were there, and this is a town known for its great food, its nightlife, for people wanting to go out and have a good time. Still, after dark, people aren't going out. So I spoke to one seafood restaurant owner, and his restaurant's a bit of an institution in Culiacan. It's delicious. And he was saying it's near empty, all of the tables around him. It'd usually be absolutely full.
We've got about 15% of our usual customers. People don't want to come out because there are risks. They're scared. Let's see how long this lasts.
And he was saying, I don't know how long I can go on like this because I've got to pay the salary of my employees. How am I going to keep the place open? We were driving around the main motorway and we saw some of the musicians, employees. Culiacan's famous for its norteño bands as well. And they'd usually be picking up big gigs in private functions, in restaurants. They were reduced to busking in the street for change. We also saw a family that were going into a big queue outside of a government office because everyone had heard that there was going to be a food parcel for them. So you can see when it's got to when people are doing that. Young mum, I think 6-year-old boy, sweet little boy, who is describing to us the protocol that they now had when there was a shootout around their house.
It was traumatic. The children were scared.
It's very bad. I was with my grandparents, and when I heard the shootouts, I had to hide.
He had to get down on the floor with his grandparents. So things like that, I think, bring home to you, I guess, not just how it's affecting ordinary people, the trauma for those children in the same way that we've seen the trauma in other places like Juarez, the number of children that will be without parents. We saw a man left in the street, his body, and we later found out that he'd been walking with his young daughter. I think she was 6 or 7 too. They took away him, obviously a faction from the cartel, and she was just left on the street. until a neighbor picked her up. So you think about those children, the directly involved, the indirectly involved, that know that they're living through something that's dangerous. We know how impressionable children can be. We think about those people, not just the ones in charge of the restaurants, but in that chain, the musicians, the waiters, the waitresses. And you think if that goes on and that situation continues, it will get lighter. Restaurants will open a little bit later. And it's starting to happen that. But while this continues, there's going to be a big impact on the population of a million-strong city.
And that's The Take. For more on John's reporting on Sinaloa, head to our social accounts on X and Instagram, where we'll drop some links. We're at AJE Podcasts. And if you like this conversation, subscribe to the Al Jazeera YouTube channel to find more podcasts and reporting on today's news. We'll be back.